avsnittet av den här konferensen. Och jag tittade på det här programmet hemma och jag tänkte att hur geniala var inte ni som nu tänkte att ni sparar en sån här god bit hit till sist. För att annars finns det risken att någon traskar iväg efter kaffet eller att människor är helt slut. Men nu har vi bara fått kaffe och nu har vi en intressant sista taltur. Så så det här ser jag fram emot. Och nu tog jag fel papper med. Och det följande talare alltså är Kaja Nes Johannessen och kommer från Norge. Och hon är då en psykologspecialist. Nu talar jag så här lite norska här på samma gång för att det här är på norska. En psykologspecialist som har fördjupat sig i kliniskt arbete med barn och unga och leder en fortbildningsenhet vid NKS Östbytune Center för behandling och vidare fortsatt utbildning. Alltså att man utbildar professionella i den kunskap man har i det här traumakunskapen. Men också ger alltså klinisk behandling till patienter. Så jag välkomnar dig, Kaja, här så får vi sen höra mera. Varsågod.
Tusen tack. Är det okej lyd? Well, yeah, super. I've been asked to present in English. I think that will go well, but sometimes I might be missing some words, so I might do some Norwegian words then, or we'll see how it goes. I also had the fortune or misfortune, I think, of getting COVID after 2.5 years of escaping it. I had gotten this idea that I was one of the ones who were immune towards the disease. But then I got really sick and have this brain fog, which means I'm sometimes missing words, but I think we'll do fine. Ja? Lite närmare här. Netto. Så bra. Just a few words about where I come from. I work at the Östbytune Center for Treatment and Professional Development. It's a child psychiatry treatment facility located just outside Oslo. It has existed for 50 years. And the past 10 years, we've been working with the neurosequential model of therapeutics and the neurosequential model in education. That's the school version of the neurosequential model. And during this work, we've grown to be internationally known for our competence on clinical and practical implications of trauma and pervasive stress. So it's very interesting when you were talking about trauma-informed or trauma-based approaches, because the neurosequential model is in many ways the base for trauma-informed applications or practice. And in my opinion, it's, and I've discussed this with many colleagues in Norway, I think the neurosequential model is a more complex version of the trauma-informative approach, which when you work with severely traumatized and complex traumatized children and adults, it's very helpful to have this really broad and complex understanding of the phenomena. During my talk and after the talk, and I'm also approachable after my presentation, but if you would like to learn more, I recommend these books. This is one of the key works of Dr. Bruce Perry, who is the founder of the neurosequential model. It's called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. I know it exists in Danish and in Norwegian. I'm not sure if it exists in Swedish or Finnish, but it's interpreted into a lot of languages, so it might do that. Last year, he published a new book called What Happened to You, which was published with Oprah Winfrey. So it's written as a conversation between the two of them, where she He brings the knowledge, and she tells about her own adverse experiences and adverse experiences of many people that she has met. And it turns out to be a very interesting conversation. Both of these books also exist as audiobooks, and especially What Happened to You is very nice to listen to because it's formed as a conversation. Also, in 2020, I published a book along with a colleague. This book is only in Czech and Norwegian at the moment, but we're working on an English version of it. And it's written for teachers and school staff. So it's based on a neurosequential model, but it's written to help people translate this theory into practice, because that's, in our experience, what people are struggling with is to take this phenomena, this knowledge, and really understand how to use it in their everyday life. So today I'll give you a brief extract from the neurosequential model of therapeutics. Sorry, I forgot to say. There also is a website called neurosequential.com. I highly recommend it. There is fan, I can't remember that English word, like, you know, the underpage on the webpage, called COVID-19. It's a lot of resources, a lot of videos which are approximately 15 to 20 minutes that are very useful to watch. They are targeted towards the pandemic and topics around that, but they're easily translated into other stressful life circumstances. And also we have the YouTube channel. If you search for info NMN, the neurosequential network, neurosequential model network, then you'll find a lot of interesting material there as well. But today I'll give you a brief extract from the NMT. I've chosen the things that I thought was most valuable for you to hear in this hour. So I'll say something about the different patterns of stress and why that's important, what we know about this now. Understand how prolonged and pervasive stress affects our brains, and because it affects our brains, it also affects our functioning, and what might help. So that's the goal for this hour. So the reason why this is interesting is that the brain mediates our thoughts, feelings, actions, and connections to others and the world, right? So the brain is an organ which has to do with everything. When we interact with other people, we use networks in our brain. When we feel something, we use networks in our brain. When we move about, we use networks in our brain. When we think, we use networks in our brain. We all know if somebody operated out my brain now, I would cease to exist, right? So the brain is at core. And it turns out what recent research from the past 10, 15 years has taught us is that if we understand more about the core principles of neuroscience, including neuroplasticity, which is the knowledge about how the brain changes, and neurodevelopment, which is the knowledge about how the brain develops, it will better help us understand both ourselves and others, right? So this is at the core of the neurosequential model. And what Dr. Perry has tried to do, because this is such a complex field of knowledge, and the brain is being like the central organ in our bodies, it's also one of the most complex organ in our body. So even though we know a lot more about how the brain develops and functions today than we did 10, 20 years ago, we still only know small parts of it, right? There's so much more to understand, and it's so complex. So what he's tried to do is to derive from all of this complex knowledge and information and extract and make models, simplifications, that doesn't violate this complexity, it doesn't violate the core principles of how the brain functions and develops, but it makes it more accessible to use in everyday life. And one of the things that he focuses on, but also a lot of research tells us, is that actually, when we talk about trauma-informed or trauma-based approaches, we're already in this field discussing how can we get rid of that term and what should we call it. And the reason why we do this is that all of the knowledge that we've learned the past years now is that we understand now that we need to focus on more than trauma with a big T, right? So one of the things that is key to understand is that different patterns of stress causes different development. It does different things for our development and our functioning. So even more than understanding the trauma with the big T, we need to understand patterns of stress. And what research tells us now is that if you experience unpredictable, severe, or prolonged adversities, it will make you more vulnerable. If you, on the other hand, experience predictable, moderate, or controlled doses of stress or adversities, it will build resilience. You will be more capable of dealing with later adversities when you meet them later in life, right? So how these stressful experiences, these adversities hit you, how long they last, if you have someone to help you deal with it, if you're part of a community, if you have this experience of adversity and then you have a rest before you have a new dose of stress, the severity of that stress you experience, all of these factors say something about how it will affect your functioning later. And the reason for this is that these different patterns of stress affect our stress response system in different ways. So, experiencing unpredictable, severe, or prolonged stress leads to vulnerability because it sensitizes the stress response system, right? What this means is that in the brainstem, we have these core regulatory networks, the stress response networks, and when we experience something that either is a threat or a threat to the organism in any way. It could be that I haven't eaten, I haven't slept enough, I experienced some new novel stimuli, or I experienced something that is dangerous to me. All of these things are supposed to activate the stress response systems, right? And these stress response systems are supposed to set off a lot of responses to help me deal with whatever I'm experiencing. If I experience this pattern of stress on the left side, it sensitizes those networks. And what this means is that instead of those networks having a slight activation, which alerts me and helps me deal with whatever I'm facing, it provides a large activation of, it floods my brain with stress hormones, right? They become too active, overly active. And so, if I get this sensitized stress response system, I will encounter situations, which we all do, because living life is stressful at times, right? And I will encounter situations which activates my stress response system. But instead of getting this slight activation of the stress response system that helps me readjust and be alert to the situation I'm supposed to deal with, I get too much stress hormones. I get over-dimensioned response for the stress response system. And it doesn't fit with the situation. So one very common experience for traumatized individuals or developmentally traumatized children is transitions, right? When they are supposed to, for example, transit from recess into the classroom again, then you're supposed to have a slight activation of the stress response system to readjust, to orient on the new task, to end the task that you're in, and to get going on the task that you're supposed to get going on, right? But instead of having a slight activation, they get a huge activation. And it doesn't fit with the situation, because the larger the activation of the stress response system, the more it affects your brain and your functioning. And I'll tell you more about this in the next slide. And the thing is that after 2 years of pandemic, a lot of us have actually experienced parts of this ourselves. Because the last 2 years with pandemic, at least in Norway, and I guess in Finland as well, it's been highly unpredictable and definitely prolonged experiences of stress, right? And so in my nearly 20 years of providing counseling and therapy now, I've heard so many stories the past 2 years of people surprisingly telling me they are surprised of their own reactions, telling me that suddenly I broke down and started to cry because my washing machine broke down, right? And normally it doesn't, I think it's annoying in my everyday life when a washing machine breaks, but I'll call someone to repair it or I'll replace it, right? I deal with it. But then I just broke down, I started crying, I didn't know how to deal with it. That's a very common example of this sensitized stress response system. And this is what happens to a lot of refugees, right? Which also, in many cases, have this severe experience, because that's what is kjennetegn. The typical signs of traumatic experience, right, is that it is so severe, it threatens your survival, right? That's what makes the possible traumatic event a trauma, is that it evokes your stress response system in a way because it threatens your survival. And one incidence of that is enough to sensitize your stress response system. Then you don't need a lot of incidences. It could be just one. And so for many refugees, they have this pattern of prolonged stress, unpredictability, and also one or more experiences of severe adversities, right? And so it's likely that their stress response system is highly sensitized. And what you were talking about, the systemic injustice, if you put this into the picture, if you experience daily systemic injustice, that's also stressors, daily stressors that affects your stress response system, right? But on the other hand, we have this other pattern of stress where you experience predictable, moderate, or controlled doses of stress. And what happens then is that our stress response system learns that I can have an activation of the stress response system. There is a stressor in my environment, something I need to orient towards, I need to deal with, but then it calms down. The situation is solved, right? And I can rest. The stress hormones can be flooded out of my body. And when you have that pattern of experiences, you actually build a tolerance of your stress response system. It takes larger doses of adversity before the stress response system is activated, right? And this is what happens with newborn babies. They cry for everything. Their stress response system are immature, right? And for every time they cry because their diaper is wet, because they are overwhelmed with everything happening, because they are tired, because they need to sleep, because they are too warm, because they are too cold, could be anything, right? And then the caregiver comes, helps them with the need they have, and it calms their stress response system, it calms their nervous system. And then they have a period of rest before suddenly something else happens. Maybe they get tired again, or overwhelmed, or something like that, right? And so the caregiver comes and helps them with that. And they get another dose of rest. And so by experiencing this over and over again, their stress response system actually becomes more and more tolerant for these stressors, right? And that's what makes a 1-year-old different from a 2-month-old, and a 3-year-old different from a 1-year-old, because they have experienced these patterns of stress that builds resilience, right? And I'll talk more about that. But what we want, one of the core things I want you to remember from this presentation is that if we could help the refugees if we can build environments around them where they can experience more of this pattern of stress instead of this pattern of stress, it will have large implications. And the reason for this is that the brain functions in a sequential manner. And so this is one of the core illustrations from the neurosequential model. It's an upside-down triangle. It's a visual model of the brain. So you have the brainstem here, the pink part, and you have the encephalon here, the yellow part, the limbic system here in the green part, and cortex here in the purple part. And if you see here, you see a lot of functions, and they are listed according to the different parts of the brain, right? So the brainstem and the cerebellum are dealing with blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, while the encephalon are dealing with arousal, appetite, sleep. So those lower parts of the brain are dealing with our survival. And when you get higher up in the brain, the more complex parts of the brain, they are dealing with concentration, with abstract thought, impulse control, understanding the consequences of your actions. When you were talking about active listening, those are skills that you need to have access to your cortex to be able to actually be an active listener. Because if your stress response system is too active, the thing that happens is that it draws blood down to these parts of the brain on the cost of these parts of the brain, right? And so the activity in our cortex, the smarter parts of our brain, is reduced when our stress response system becomes more active. And what these bubbles here are meant to tell us and show us, it's called the serotonergic network, the norepinephrine network, and the dopaminergic network. And all of these together make the stress response system. It's a huge simplification because our body has a lot of stress responses, but if we, to simplify, call it the stress response system, you can see that these networks have connection to all parts of the brain, right? And so when our stress response system becomes active, it's not only a feeling of being stressed. It affects our entire functioning. It affects the thoughts we have. It affects our ability to be in contact with people. It affects our sense of time. It affects our problem-solving skills. It affects our motor control. It affects everything, right? And so the reason why this is so important is that when you have a sensitized stress response system, it means that you more often than others will experience that your stress response system activates, right? And floods your brain and body with stress hormones. And that will affect a large proportion of your functioning. For instance, IQ. I have snake phobia. If you were to IQ test me in a room with a very nice tester. He would calm me, give me a nice explanation of the tasks I was supposed to do. You would probably get a quite accurate description of my IQ if I had slept well and everything was in order. But if you had put me in the same situation and with the same nice test man, and then you have this glass cage with a snake in it on my right side, it would activate my stress response system so much that parts of my cortex would shut down. And the tasks that I, in the other situation, were able to solve, I wouldn't be able to solve them because I wouldn't have access to those parts of the brain. So that would give a false idea of my IQ because my stress response system is activated. And this affects so many things. It also affects our ability to be in touch with people. And like I said, impulse control, like the children we treat at Østbytunet, huge problems with concentration, impulsivity, stuff like that. So many of these children qualify for the diagnosis of ADHD. When we manage to calm their stress response system, a lot of them no longer qualify for this diagnosis, right? Because suddenly they have access to these parts of the brain. And so children who at one moment were not able to play board games with their peers, we managed to help them calm their stress response system down, and suddenly they're able to actually interact in quite complex board games and wait for their turn, understand the rules, do things that takes a lot of effort from the cortex. And so what we're talking about now is something that Bruce Perry calls state-dependent functioning. Our inner state influences really all of our functioning, right? And so if we move from this upside-down triangle and see the state of calm, then the neocortex, the smarter parts of our brain, is active. It has a lot of blood flow, and we have access to these parts of the brain. But if we move down into the state of alarm, which isn't necessarily a lot of activation of the stress response system, it's the diencephalon that is the most active part of the brain. And we tend to be more emotional and reactive instead of being logical and thoughtful when we act on something. So how many of you have ever experienced that you've been in a fight with someone, you felt like you've been out of balance in a way, and you snapped at someone, right? This is the reason why you do that, because in that state, it's these parts of the brain that are active. It's not the thoughtful parts of the brain. So if the thoughtful parts of the brain were active, they would help you understand that I want to say this to my partner now, but it's not going to be a good thing, so I stop myself from saying this to the partner, right? But if they are offline, you don't have that help. And so this happens to a lot of traumatized people, that they are not able to, they might understand what they're supposed to do, they might understand the consequences of what they do or should do, they might understand the rules, but it's difficult to follow them because they are driven from different impulses. And in the neurosequential model, Dr. Perry also talks about the difference between cortical actions and pre-cortical actions, which I think is really useful term to have some knowledge about. Have you ever touched something really, really hot so you almost burned yourself? Right. So what did your body do? Yeah. You pull your fingers away, right? And if somebody asked you, why did you pull your fingers away? You would probably answer, because I was just about to burn my fingers, right? But the thing is, you didn't pull your fingers from that hot stove because you were thinking that you were about to burn them, because that would be a too slow process. If you were supposed to bring that information up to the cortex and react on it, you would burn your fingers. So we are wired and designed to have a mechanism that allows us to react long before this information reaches the smart parts of our brains. So all the way we experience life and our environment is through our sensory apparatus, right? We have these different senses, and these sensory apparatus, we have vision, we have audio, we have the proprioceptive system, and all of this provides sensory input. This is sent to the brainstem, where the stress response system is located. If the stress response system, when it receives this sensory input, detects in any way that this input could threaten our survival in any way, then it automatically sends information to react on it, right? And so, when I touch this really hot thing, there are pain receptors and temperature receptors in my fingertips. They send information up to the brainstem. They detect here is danger for tissue damage, right? And what happens immediately is that they send out signals to the muscles in my arm to withdraw the arm. At the same time as this happens, the sensory information is provided further up to other parts of the brain, the thinking parts of the brain. And so when someone asks me later, why did you withdraw your hand? Then I have had a chance to reflect on that, and I can tell them because I was about to burn my fingers, right? But the action happened long before I had a chance to think about it. So that's pre-cortical actions. And then you have cortical actions, where you take in information, and you think about it, you reflect on it, and you act on it. And a lot of traumatized people, they have experiences that, for different reasons, activates the stress response system, because it reminds the brain on previous experiences with danger. And so they suddenly act on that information without their own knowledge, right? Because of pre-cortical, it's an unconscious process. And the other thing about this, which is very important to understand, is how central these networks are for the functioning of our entire brain. If we think about this small daily example, when you're thirsty, what do? You go to have a drink, right? But that small action of getting something to drink when you're thirsty is really, really a complex coordination between many parts of your brain. So what happens when you get thirsty is that you get sensory input from your stomach and from your body, which is sent up to the brainstem, which detects, I haven't had enough water. I haven't had enough fluid. This information, the brainstem detects as an imbalance that needs to be fixed. And so the first thing that the brainstem does is it sets off a feeling of thirst to motivate us to get something to drink, right? But it doesn't help me to sit in my chair and feel thirst. I need to actually get this water into my body, right? And so I also need the brainstem to send this information to other parts of the brain that helps me get up from the chair, walk into some room where I can actually get access to something to drink, but also help me plan the action where I need to find something to fill the water in, either in my hands or in a cup or something. And I also need to coordinate my muscles and my body in a way to help me tap the water into the bottle or the cup that I'm having. And then after doing that, I need to coordinate my body in a way so I actually get the water into my mouth and not spill it all over my body, right? And so this very, very simple action demands so much cooperation from the entire brain. So it's like a symphony orchestra, right? And have you ever been to a concert with a symphonic orchestra? Before they start, you have all these sounds, right? Everyone is tuning in their instruments, and to me it sounds like chaos. And then the director comes in, and he taps his little stick, everything goes quiet, and then he starts telling them what to do, and you have this symphony, right? Everyone knows what to play at what point, with which strength, and when to stop, right? And it works together. When the stress response system is not dysregulated, the brain works as a symphony. It's easy to be in life because it's easy to get that glass of water when you need it. The brain knows what to do. When the stress response systems are dysregulated, there's so many things that becomes a hassle and draws on your energy. So one of the most important things we can do to help refugees is to provide tolerable doses of stress and room for regulation. This will help people access their resources, and it will also help people heal and readjust, right? And this is true for the refugees, but it's also true for the helpers. One example is the active listening. I can't be an active listener if my stress response system is too activated, because I don't have access to my cortex or to my best connection skills, right? So I need to calm my own stress response system down to be able to actually have this good connection with the other. And so one of the things that we need to really understand is what causes stress, what causes the stress response system for this person to activate, and how can this person help that stress response system calm down. Because we now know, also from research, about brain plasticity, right? We know that the brain can change. If the brain is provided with repetitive stimulation and activation of the networks that we want to change, it will change in response to that information and experience, right? But in order to change a network in the brain, we need to actually activate that network. So if we want to calm down the stress response systems of traumatized people, then we need to activate their stress response system, which you don't have to do anything about with refugees because their stress response system is it's already activated. And then you need to provide solid doses of regulation where the stress response system can calm down so that the stress response system starts to learn tolerance instead of vulnerability and sensitizing, right? Does it make sense? Okay. So the question is, what does this look like in practice and in everyday life? And that's a huge question with many answers, and it could look like a lot of things for different people. I've listed 5 domains here, which all of them are important to help provide this other pattern of stress. Psychoeducation. If you teach people what I just taught you about the stress response system, about how the stress response system affects all of your functioning, it's not you who are stupid, it's not you who are mad, but you're in a state right now that causes your brain and body to function in a certain way. Do you always function in this way, or do you have experiences when you function in other ways? How is it when you are calm compared to when you are in alarm, or when you are really, really in fear? And so, when we teach people about this, it gives them information to help them understand what's going on in their bodies and brains. That in itself can lower the stress, because a lot of people experiencing a sensitized stress response system have behaviors, because they have so many pre-cortical behaviors, right? That they feel stupid, they feel mad, they feel sick, they feel like, I haven't met one child at Øspetuna who doesn't think that he's a bad child, right? But he's not a bad child, but his stress response system is way off. And it causes him to behave in ways that cause trouble for him. And the only way for a child to understand this and understand what to do with this is to think that there's something wrong with me. It must be me. I must be bad, right? And so just providing this information for people has a huge impact. And there are some studies from natural disasters where they have gone into communities and just provided this information, psychoeducational information to people, and it has shown better effect than debriefing and trauma-directed therapies, like dealing with actual memories, right? So helping people normalize and understand what they're experiencing is a way to lower the stress. The other thing is structure and predictability. Because our brains are wired to respond with an activation of the stress response system whenever we experience something unpredictable or novel. It's just the way we're wired, right? And again, if you have a sensitized stress response system, it doesn't mean a slight activation of the stress response system, it means a huge activation of the stress response system. So if we can build predictability and structure into the daily life of people with a sensitized stress response system, we decrease the amount of stressors that they experience in every day. And so just by repetition, I know today it's Monday, always on Monday this happens. I know it's the third lesson of the day. On the third lesson of the day, this usually happens. I know that this teacher is coming and she normally does this and this. We don't have to be creative and come up with new things all the time. On the other hand, we really need to, it's much better that we actually think about how we want to structure things and stick to it. Because it helps the brain adjust and know what to predict, and it doesn't have to spend any energy on trying to figure out what's going to happen and get an unnecessary dose of stress from that. So structure and predictability is really, really important. And then we have play and sensory motor stimulation. So if we take play first, it's impossible for the brain to be in fear and also be in a true playful mode, right? Those states are not compatible. And so if you manage to engage children or adults in true playful mode, then you have provided a dose of regulation. You have provided an experience where the stress response system gets to calm down, and you have all of these other stress-reducing hormones flooding in your body and brain. sensory motor stimulation also has the possible effect of calming the stress response system. Because you remember I said that we experience the world through our sensory apparatus, right? And all of the sensory input is transferred through the brainstem and the stress response system before it's distributed to the rest of the brain. So sensory motor stimulation, using our brains, using our bodies and our senses, is a direct language to reach the stress response system. And in many situations, the only language to reach the stress response system. Because if the stress response system is too activated, the cortex is shut down. And if you talk too much to a highly dysregulated person, you will further activate the stress response system of that person. Because two things happen. You are trying to reach a part of the brain that is not online. And the other thing is that if you are dysregulated enough, there are some muscles in the inner ear that loosen up, and the ear doesn't differentiate between human voices and different sounds anymore. And so all sounds are just being poured into the brain, and this becomes noise, which actually further activates the stress response system. So one of the things that we now do at Østbytunet, when children are dysregulated and they want to flee away from our facility, normally the frontline staff would go with them to take care that they are not hurt, and they would try to persuade them to come back to the facility, right? But that sometimes escalated the situation further. And what they tell me now that they do is that they always walk the child, but they don't try to persuade them to come back. Now they have this self-instruction that this child is so dysregulated now that the brainstem, that is the most active part of the brain, and the brainstem needs sensory motor stimulation. So the child is seeking to walk, to move, to calm their own stress response system. And so they walk with them to make sure that nothing bad happens to them, but also to help them get this input to the senses and to the body. And when the child is allowed to do this without a lot of talk going on at the same time, they experience that the child calms down much faster than when they try to talk with the child at the same time. And so after a while, the child starts to walk more slowly, which is a sign of lower dysregulation. The breathing gets a little more deeper, and then they start to engage relationally. They still don't try to persuade the child to come back to the facility, because that's talking to the cortex. They're trying to connect with the child to further regulate the stress response system. And their experience is that when they do it this way, which Perry calls regulate, relate, then reason, the sequence of engagement, it takes a lot less time to get the children back to the facility than it used to be when they were trying to persuade them logically to come back to the facility. So sensory motor stimulation is highly effective as a way to help the stress response system calm down. And it makes sense, right? Because our brains were designed in a totally different environment than we live in now. Our brains were designed when we lived in caves and were hunting animals and were meeting predators, right? And so our stress cyclus is designed the way that we have this huge activation of the stress response system, and in some way we ran away from a predator, and then the dangerous situation was over, and the stress response system could calm down. But now, in modern day life, we have so many experiences that fire our stress response system, but we don't move, right? And so we're not able to release that stress cycle. We're not able to finish that stress cyclus. So in many situations, just doing 5 push-ups or 10 jumping jacks or something like that signals to the stress response system, the brainstem, that the danger is over. It's the language that that part of the brain understands. And then you have togetherness and connection, which is so important. And for refugees, what they've lost, right? In many cases. Most of us think it's very exciting to travel and discover new places, right? But the reason why we think this is exciting is that we can choose to go home. It's a free choice, right? It's totally different if you were forced to go to this place and you don't know when you can return home. You don't know if you will like it here. You don't know how long you will be here. And so it becomes an experience that sort of activates the stress response system instead. And if we manage to acknowledge this and acknowledge what they've lost and help the brain soothe in things that remind you of something you know, like rituals, dance, music, rhythm, songs from your home country, being able to speak your own language, or a sense of belonging, it will calm your stress response system down. So what Perry is, I lost the word now, but he's talking a lot about what is a therapeutic dose. And I'm not talking about hours and hours of these rituals or regulation or activities. Our neural networks respond to very brief interactions. And so a 3-minute period, 4 3-minute periods within an hour could be enough to start a new neural network in the brain. And so we need these small doses. We don't need to sit for hours and listen and listen and listen. It could be enough that I really meet you and I actively listen to you and I stay with you, and then I do it again a little later. And we get this sense of belonging and calmness. And so I want to conclude with this, because part of Perry's research and a lot of other research now tells us that as human beings, we are actually able to deal with a lot of adversities in our life, but one of the main factors predicting whether we are damaged from it or not is our history of connectedness, right? So our history of connectedness is a better predictor of your health than your history of adversity. And in Dr. Perry's words, be with each other, celebrate diversity, listen and learn from each other, share time, food, and work. The superpower of humankind is our capacity to connect. It's regulating, it's rewarding, and it's the major route by which we can teach, coach, parent, heal, and learn. It's the Kinder egg that helps in so many ways. And so if you can manage to create environments around refugees where they have this sense of belonging, then we can buffer a lot of the stress that they're actually under, and we can also prevent a lot of consequences from the stress that they already have experienced.